So I'm walking around in beautiful Katati, the best place to be in Sonoma County. Unfortunately, an hour ago, the Russians bombarded Ukraine in many cities with missile strikes. Now, according to CNN, which or published an article about an hour ago, the Ukrainian government claimed to shoot about 6/7 of the missiles down, but they wouldn't be reporting on the missile strikes if their missile defense systems weren't working. The truth of the matter is, that Russia has the best missile defense systems in the world, and America and NATO missile defense systems, even if they are sending them to Ukraine, and even if the Ukrainians are able to operate them, which takes training, months of training, even if they are able to use the missile defense systems that we've been sending them recently, they're not as well equipped as the Russians' missile defense system, which the Russians give to China. And the reason CNN and other major media outlets are reporting on the missile strikes in Ukraine right now is because they didn't shoot the majority of them down. They are hitting Ukraine's energy infrastructure hard. And, the CNN article that I read this morning said that, about 50% of Ukraine's energy infrastructure is down, but that's a lie. It's actually significantly more than 50%. The metro station in Kiev is down right now. The thing about the energy infrastructure is that this sort of thing is not something that can be repaired in weeks or months. It takes years. To replace. The idea that the Ukrainians can have almost zero electricity and win this war is completely foolhardy and untrue. Now, to the situation on the front lines. After the withdrawal from Kherson, the Russians put most of their troops in Zaporozhye, as well as a bunch of troops in Belarus to the north. But the majority of the fighting is in BAKHMUT. Now, Western media outlets have been saying that BAKHMUT is of little to no strategic importance, but we know that's a lie, because the Russians and the Ukrainians would not be putting so many men into that town if it wasn't of strategic importance. And the reason why it is of strategic importance is because it's at a crossroads. Now, what happens in the winter in Ukraine is the ground gets very muddy or even snowy and frozen, and it's just hard to send tanks and other military, there's a car going by, and other military vehicles and foot soldiers through, tundra. So you need to have control of the roads, and BAKHMUT is at a crossroads. And so the Ukrainians know that once Russia takes BAKHMUT, they will be able to move on to Kramatorsk and Slovyansk and take complete control of Donbass. However, the Russians have not taken BAKHMUT that quickly, because what's happening is the Zelensky regime, and I say his name without a Z because he banned the letter Z. Anyway, the Zelensky regime has told the people of Ukraine that they're doing a great job of defending BAKHMUT and all this, and so they keep feeding men into it. And while here comes a car. And while the Western media while the Western media has reported that the Russians are losing 50 to 70 soldiers a day in Bakhmut, they have not reported how many soldiers the Ukrainians are losing per day. But according to Ukrainian and Russian sources, the Ukrainians are losing 200 men killed in action per day, and total casualties killed in action plus wounded is somewhere between 500 and 1,000 per day in Bakhmut. And the reason the Russians are not in a hurry to take Bakhmut and allowing the Ukrainians to put their men through this meat grinder has to do with the stated goals of Vladimir Putin and the Russian government. The stated goals of the special military operation are first and foremost, the demilitarization of Ukraine. It's not, controlling territory isn't necessarily what matters. Like if you listen to Lieutenant Colonel retired Douglas McGregor on YouTube, he states he says over and over again that land in and of itself is not worth having. This is the mistake that the Nazis made in World War II. They were going on all of these offensives to take land, but the way you win a war is not by controlling land. The way that you win a war is by essentially killing or wounding all of your opponent's military, is by destroying the opponent's military. And so that's exactly what is happening in Bakhmut right now, is the Russians are grinding the Ukrainians down and demilitarizing them. Now, the Biden administration in the West has been encouraging this stand-up comedian with no political experience, Zelensky, to continue this war and to fight to the last Ukrainian. And while there are ultra-nationalist right-wing Nazis in Ukraine and part of the Ukrainians' military, I don't think that this war is a good idea. As much as I'd love to see them, as much as I love to see Nazis being destroyed, there are conscripted members of the Ukrainian military who aren't Nazis, and their deaths are a tragedy. And the Biden administration and NATO and the European Union, they have the ability to tell Zelensky to surrender and to stop giving him weapons and to not continue fighting this war that they cannot win. And I understand that Americans don't give a shit about this, and they're able to say things like, "Oh, I stand with Ukraine," even though that doesn't mean anything. But we have the ability to cut them off, stop giving them weapons, stop giving them money, which will force the Zelensky regime to surrender and to stop this needless sacrifice of this war that even Barack Obama said several years ago that cannot be won, because the Russians have escalatory dominance in the region. Anyway, if you're wondering where I'm getting my my information from and my resources, I recommend Alexander Mercouris, Alex Christoforou from the Duran, Brian Berletic from the New Atlas, Gonzalo Lira, Scott Ritter, retired Lieutenant Colonel Douglas McGregor. Get educated, because not only is this bad for our economy and for the European economy, this war is preventing food from getting to Africa. This war is sacrificing men on both sides, on the Russian and Ukrainian sides. And it is bringing us to the brink of, a possible nuclear war. And so I understand that, this stuff is far away, but it's actually extremely relevant. And it's a war that needs to end because we're supporting a side with weapons and money that cannot win.